So yeah, I guess we can go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining the quarterly node operator focused community call. Once a quarter, we have one that's focused specifically on towards those who are running infrastructure on the Livepeer network. We try and talk about topics that are directly relevant to them, have an opportunity to help troubleshoot, answer questions, get feedback just related to those running infrastructure on the network, and that's this call. We are recording this, though as I mentioned, we're kind of doing a screen capture recording. I hope it comes out well. The direct recording is not working out of Google for some reason, but we're also live streaming this at livepeer.org/TV, and I can share the slides after the fact. So we can dig in and get started. As a reminder, Livepeer's mission is building the world's open video infrastructure. It's a big, ambitious mission. We're well on our way, but have a lot of work to do. So on today's call, we're going to focus it around something that we shipped very recently that I'm really excited about, the Orchestrator Performance Leaderboard. We're going to give some practical tips and do Q&A on anyone looking to debug and improve their node's performance on the leaderboard. We can talk about how some of the stake and fees are shifting around. And then I'm excited to spend a bunch of time on this new experimental small program that Jan actually submitted a grant application for this morning, which is aimed at rewarding those who are performing well on the leaderboard and hence performing well for the Livepeer network with some additional Livepeer token beyond just what the inflationary mechanics are in the network today. And this will be a great opportunity to talk about kind of the first quick tests we want to do in this program, but also to get feedback and brainstorm around longer term ideas or things we can do to make sure we're aligning rewards to those who are doing useful work. And of course, Q&A. I'm going to be looking at kind of my presentation as I'm going, but don't hesitate to interrupt me and just yell out if you have a question, and I'll stop talking. Cool. So before we get into those, just wanted to give a quick view at the kind of weekly network fees and daily rewards that are earned by node operators on the network right now. On the fee side, you see it's been, small but non-trivial amount of fees over the past couple of months, ranging from, let's say, $100 to $600 in weekly fees. There's been a couple weeks where fees appear to be zero, likely due to performance issues or reliability issues that the customers who have been using the network have been seeing and kind of switching over just to specific operators. But recently, last week, we actually kind of hit an all-time high in fees in the network with over $1,200 worth of ETH paid out and distributed to orchestrators through the Livepeer network. And that's a result of kind of increasing usage of Livepeer through the Livepeer.com hosted API, through some of the performance testing that's going on via this new performance leaderboard and test harness, and the stream mirroring from the API usage. So I think we're on the right track to be growing, and as we can onboard more users and customers of Livepeer, hopefully we'll see these fees continue to grow and be distributed to orchestrators. Mintable tokens, this is the inflationary LPT, is currently, according to Scout, 6,300 tokens a day. Those are divvied out in rough proportion to stake, and you can see your stake equity in the Explorer, on your Explorer profile page. It shows you what percentage of the stake you have on the network, and that would be roughly what percentage of these tokens you would be earning, in addition to the reward cuts that you're keeping for running the nodes. So that's a view into kind of the current makeup of rewards. So that kind of brings me to, well, I guess I'll make a key point about this before I move on. So one of the key recognitions here is that the value of the LPT that's distributed each day is much higher than the value of fees that are currently being earned by node operators in the network. And over the long term, what would give the network its real value would be if the fees in ETH that were paid into the network dramatically exceeded the amount of inflationary Livepeer token, and it were the fees alone that were causing the competition for high performance and GPU transcoding on the network. But until we get to that point, a lot of the kind of rewards that you're all earning as orchestrators are subsidized by this LPT amount. And that's good because it can help bootstrap the network, but it's also a little bit misaligned where you're able to earn these Livepeer token fees simply by calling reward every day, regardless of whether you're contributing valuable transcoding to the network in a reliable and performant way or not. But clearly, for the network to succeed and be really useful, we need nodes that are going to actually contribute reliable transcoding and have good bandwidth and be able to do it in real time. And so in order to try and kind of create visibility into who's doing that and to take some steps towards better aligning incentives, we embarked on kind of this big project called the Orchestrator Performance Leaderboard. And this shipped, I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, but shipped very recently. And it kind of looks like this. It's accessible in the Explorer. And when you click on the Orchestrators tab in the Explorer, you see the same view you've always seen. You see the orchestrators ranked by stake, but there's actually a little button called Performance right next to the kind of staking button over there. And that shifts the ranking to instead be ranked by stake, being ranked according to the performance of a stream testing framework that we're running that shows how well orchestrators are performing against those tests. And it's an entirely different ranking, and stake doesn't have any impact into it. The best ranked node could have 0.0001 LPT staked, but could actually be performing the best. And this gives a view into which nodes are actually set up to win work and to retain that work and to contribute value to the network. So I think it's a really important view for delegators to have into the node operators on the network. And I'll kind of explain what the numbers that you see here are and what they mean. So first of all, the streams that are being used to test each node are originating in 3 separate regions, and we have 3 rankings for the separate regions as well as a global ranking. Those regions are the United States, where the streams are originating from Chicago, the EU, where streams are originating from Frankfurt, and in Asia, we have streams originating from Singapore. And then I think it's every 4 hours, a number of streams are sent to each node. And there's a couple kind of metrics that are being tracked and recorded according to the test being performed against each node. One is the latency, which means how long did it take to upload the segments to that node, for that node to transcode the segments, and for that node to return the segments and the download completes. So that's kind of the end-to-end latency for each node. And then a success rate, which is out of every segment of video sent to the nodes for 2 seconds, each 2-second segment, how many of them were returned to me versus how many errors did I receive back from the orchestrators. And why would the orchestrators receive errors or return errors? Well, one is if they're actually too busy to accept another segment and they return an orchestrator busy error. And that would occur if they're actually not moving fast enough with the previous segments encoding to be ready for the next segments encoding by the time it's available, aka if they can't keep up with real-time streaming. So there's a latency score, a success rate score. They are normalized on a scale of, or the latency score is normalized on a score of 0 to 10. And then to get the total score, which dictates the rankings, these numbers are just multiplied with one another. So it's a pretty simple algorithm. So for the top node in the list that you see here, you have a latency score of 7.6. You have a success rate of 52%. Multiplied together to get a total score of 4.0, and that's currently the highest global score. The global score is actually I believe it's the average score of the score from each individual region. And so pretty straightforward algorithm. I think the region specific views are probably more useful than the global view right now, because most likely the node operator is only located in one of these regions and might score very well there without any regard for how they score in other regions. So you can use the select region dropdown to view those right there. So that's the performance leaderboard. Before I get into some of the takeaways and the practical concerns about how you can score well and do better, does anyone have any comments or questions on the methodology, including those who worked on this? Nico, Jan, and Jay, if you guys want to add anything, jump in.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I'd add is that the scoring framework was meant to be something that would evolve over time. So just given what has been highlighted as inputs into the scoring formula right now, you might have noticed that there are certain things that are not captured there, right? So for example, something that's not captured there right now is your actually capacity and scale. So it uses a metric to measure how fast you're able to transcode a single stream, but that doesn't necessarily map to how many streams that you can support in total at any given point in time. And that was purposeful. The intent was to launch this sooner rather than later. But I think we can expect the scoring framework to evolve over time to incorporate additional performance metrics such as capacity and scale, and possibly others that we can kind of figure out over time.
I see that the test harness code is available. Are the individual results publicly available as well from historical tests for as the test harness runs in an automated way?
Yeah, so the test results are available via an API. They're just not surfaced via the front end right now. Nico worked on that API. So Nico, do you have any suggestions for anyone that's interested in checking those out before they're available in the front end?
Yeah, sure. So the API repository is open source. There is some basic documentation there, but there's currently two endpoints. One is the aggregated stats that you can see in the leaderboard that's surfaced in the view, and the other is the raw stats, which requires you to specify an orchestrator. So if you query the raw stats endpoint with an orchestrator specified, you would get all the historical tests for a specific orchestrator.
Should we add that endpoint list maybe into the FAQ, and we could drop it in the chat room as well?
Yes, that's a good idea.
Also, I'm noticing all but 12 orchestrators have non-zero scores. Does that mean only 12 orchestrators are actively transcoded?
Yeah, I think that's going to be, I'm about to get to the takeaways. I think that a big takeaway is that we have work to do to improve the quality and reliability of transcoding, but also just get through like this first pass and just troubleshoot many nodes that may be set up to do this effectively, but may have some small misconfiguration that's preventing video from reaching them, or preventing them from being accessible over the public internet, or potentially not configured correctly to route the work onto their GPU. So yeah, let's get into some of that. Cool. So
actually, this is Victor. It's happening to us. I don't know why our score is 0. We run on GPU. We have transcoded and are continuing to transcode. So we're looking into why the score is 0 when it should not be.
Definitely. Yeah, let's get into that, because it like I said, it could very well be an issue with the test harness itself, or some misconfiguration over here. So we'd love to kind of do real-time debugging with people in the chat room, help people run the benchmarking tool themselves, just to confirm that they can and should be getting scores. Cool. So related to that, my number one initial takeaway is that very few nodes are contributing reliable transcoding that can keep up with real-time live streams, right? And this is what we we need for the network to be useful, and why I think it's important for us to address incentives to make sure that nodes are actually contributing value here. This is measured both by the number Chris just referenced, where only 12 to 15 nodes have a non-zero score on any given day. But then even beyond, like even if you look within those 12 to 15 nodes that have a score, very few of them have high enough latency scores to indicate they're actually keeping up with real-time live video. So sure, they can transcode one segment that comes to them, but the second the broadcaster tries to send them another segment, their node is busy, and that work needs to be routed towards another node. So they wouldn't be retaining the work over many consecutive segments for live streams. And again, anyone with the GPU configured correctly should be able to handle not just one, but many concurrent live streams in sub-real time. Even on a high-end CPU, should be able to keep up with real time. And so I think there's a big opportunity for, now that this is visible, for node operators to quickly make improvements or debug in order to contribute more positively. But I also think it's a huge opportunity for people who maybe didn't feel that they had the opportunity to join the Livepeer network and immediately build up stake, to show that, hey, even without stake, they can perform really well. And that would quickly attract stake because they'd be earning fees, sharing it back, and token holders want to stake towards nodes that are performing well, that will help the network long term. So I think that's a big takeaway there. The second point is, yeah, there's no reliable coverage in Asia yet, and Asia is obviously a huge market for live streaming. Some of the early livepeer.com API users have had some of their user-generated streams originate in Asia and Australia, and have actually received subpar transcoding performance as a result. And so, again, if we can put the right incentives in place, it'd be great to attract more capacity out of those regions, right? And yeah, I think I addressed the last point, but I think the new rankings make it easy for high-performing nodes to attract stake and break into the network. Cool. So let's move on to debugging and improving your node's performance. So what happens if your score is 0 right now? Why might that be? What are some common causes? The three that came to mind for me were, your node needs to be accessible via the public internet, and it needs to be properly addressed in the transcoder registration transaction when you kind of submit your URL. And so those would be like very common reasons why this testing harness just couldn't reach your node correctly. If you put an address, but it's actually not responding to requests over the public internet, that would not have prevented you from calling reward over the last few months, but it will prevent you from getting transcoding work. Is your node properly configured, and do you have the right startup options, especially to allow enough sessions on your GPU concurrently, so you can keep up with real time and parallelize the work. I think Janne might have some info to share on that and some resources to link to. And then, yeah, do you have enough compute power to keep up with real time encoding? So, if you're running on a laptop, if you're running on a small CPU-based cloud instance with a single CPU core, you're probably not going to be able to keep up with real-time live encoding, especially if the inputs are HD and there's a number of different outputs suggested. So, at the minimum, having a number of CPU cores would be required, but even that wouldn't necessarily be cost effective relative to the performance you'd get out of a GPU, which is really the type of hardware that we're looking to attract to the network. So, it's okay. There's still value in being a token holder, staking, running a node, earning the inflation, helping the network in other ways with that token through community building, evangelism, marketing, product onboarding, providing liquidity, these sorts of ways. But for the actual reliable video encoding, we need the right hardware on the network. Yanin, do you want to jump in with any suggestions for people if they see a 0 score but don't believe they they should have a 0 score right now or a low score?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, as Doug mentioned, there is a dependency in these transcoding tests, right? And the dependency is that the actual test harness used to run the tests themselves. And the test harness seeks to as closely approximate what the experience for a real end user would look like from these regions. And that's the way that it was designed to work, where the whole goal of the transcoding test is to see what would a real user see if they actually use the Livepeer network from this region. But as a result, there might be tweaks that need to be made to the test harness. There might be fixes that need to be made. So I really think if you see a score of 0 and for whatever reason you don't think that that is appropriate, the best thing to do is to drop in one of the public channels, probably the transcoding channel, and post about it there. And I think people on the core team are more than happy to help debug that and discover whether it really is just a configuration issue, or it's possible that it might be something that needs to be tweaked with the test harness as well. And we kind of want to evolve that with everyone that's participating in this leaderboard post-launch. I think a few other things that I'd add here are that the core team is working on improving the resources, the informational and educational resources available, so that some of this isn't so opaque, especially around different configuration options, around kind of recommendations for your setup. As many of you might know, as node operators, the current state of the docs leaves a little to be desired, to put it kindly. And we're working on rehauling all of that. But the first steps that we've been taking are to release these more action-specific guides around specific areas that we perceive as important in our experience operating nodes. So I think what would be helpful is if there are particular things that are really confusing to you as node operators, let us know, either in the chat or on the forum, because that will be a good signal for us to prioritize getting those guides up as opposed to other guides that we might be thinking of doing. We're going to be doing this regardless, but if you want to see things sooner, we can certainly ship it out sooner, as long as you let us know. So that's on resources and what we're working on. So one thing that we're working on that we should have available at the beginning of next week is a guide on setting capacity limits. So Doug mentioned this earlier, where there are different configuration options available, and there's actually a configuration option that helps you set like how many streams you want to accept, and there's a default value, but there isn't much information available right now to inform what you should set it to, if not the default value. So that's an example of something that we'll be putting out early next week to support people. And if you want to see anything like that, or if anything's been on your mind, just let us know. The one other thing I'd note here is that we're also planning on making a more concerted effort to understand kind of a lot of the pain points that you might face on these sources of confusion. And that's something that Nico is working on. And he's currently planning out a process to kind of make it easier for node operators, but generally members of the community, to kind of share feedback and help people that are developing the software understand what are the core issues that should be prioritized sooner rather than later. So Nico, I know you're early on here, but if you wanted to give an early preview to the node operators on the call of what to expect maybe next week, that might be helpful.
Yes, definitely. So one of the things that we'd like to hear you guys talk about is the bottlenecks you've experienced setting up your nodes and the current bottlenecks you're experiencing in operating high-performance nodes. But we'd also like to hear from people that were interested in the past in running a Livepeer node, but haven't really gotten around to him and understand what their pain points are, so that we can indeed better understand where we can make improvements and understand really you guys and what you guys need going forward. So you can expect a survey to be around somewhere next week or in the next 2 weeks. And yeah, we'd love for you to fill that out, and we'd love to hear from you. So thank you.
Well, So two guides that are worth highlighting in the docs. I kind of have a screenshot up here. Is just one is how to benchmark transcoding, which gives instructions for binary you can or source you can download and build, and then run a kind of test of your own infrastructure. And then the one right above it is how to run an orchestrator with GPU transcoding, which is useful if you're looking to ensure that you've configured your node correctly to leverage your GPU for encoding, or you're actually looking to partner with the GPU operator and get set up. Cool. Jan, I think you were about to say something. I was going to move on, but if you had anything, feel free to jump in.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that's it for me. So feel free to record.
Cool. Okay. So before talking about the kind of incentive program, just to quickly highlight, this leaderboard is having an effect already, even in the first week or so. A couple of the nodes near the top of the leaderboard, Orca, Mage Orca, Live Pool. Well, I guess Mage Orca and Orca are better examples. I think they had very little stake on the nodes prior to this leaderboard being published, but they shot to the top of the leaderboard. They are generating meaningful fees in ETH and sharing some back to the delegators, and obviously helping the network through the transcoding, and have quickly attracted, even with a lot of attention, enough stake to break into the top 20. And I'd imagine that will continue to grow as they earn stake potentially through the incentive program. And so it's just a powerful example here. Again, what I was mentioning before is there's a real opportunity right now for those of the right types of operators with the GPUs to jump onto the network and quickly begin to build up a stake of LPT, where it might have been more challenging before when things felt more stagnant with the staking. Cool. Okay, so let's talk about a potential performance rewards program here. So as I had hinted at before, like the incentives that have existed in the Livepeer network so far have been great for generating a community, for bootstrapping it with a little bit of transcoding supply in order to bootstrap and test out this network and iterate on the software and whatnot. Even serve transcoding for some of the initial users building on Livepeer. But really, the incentives alone have not attracted the scalable GPU operators onto the network, and there the story is, well, the fees would do that because they can earn additional fees while they're mining cryptocurrency, and that's a no-brainer value proposition, and so enough supply will show up. But on the fee side alone, you have a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem, where until the fees are large enough to get them to do the DevOps work to run Livepeer alongside their mining, it might not be that interesting or compelling. And so I think it's really important that as a community, we start to address ways we can add incentives that help bootstrap the network with the GPU miner type of supply. And if you think of adjusting the in-protocol incentives and routing inflation to these nodes directly, that would be like an ultimate goal, but that's also a big task that would require, there's a lot of different options and mechanisms you can do for doing that. There's a lot of security risks you have to consider in terms of how people might game that. We need community consensus to make these changes. There's a governance process there. So, and ultimately, it might be really, really difficult to prove real valuable work on chain alone in a way the protocol can trust. So I think a really good first step is to think about, well, how can we move quickly to create kind of off-chain incentive programs that can still route LPT towards people who are contributing valuable work on the network. And so Yanin just submitted a grant proposal to the community node to run kind of the first experiment here. I put a couple of the bullets on 2 slides, but maybe Yanin, you'd like to kind of jump in and describe how you're viewing this, first short-term experiment that we can run.
Sure. So I guess for starters, it might be helpful to describe what the goals for this program are. And how I currently see it is that the goals are to kickstart experimentation with performance incentive programs, where the experimentation is extra protocol. And that's actually key here because, as Doug mentioned, any in-protocol mechanism, there's challenges in designing one that's actually secure, but there's also challenges in developing consensus in order to make that change happen. But more rapid experimentation can certainly happen with these extra protocol mechanisms. And because they're extra protocol, they can be funded by an individual, a collection of individuals, what have you. So the goal here is to really kickstart experimentation. And the other goal is to generate empirical data for the community to inform further design and decisions around how to approach this topic of incentivizing the supply side, where I think it's nice to theorize around what is rational for someone to do, given a certain amount of rewards or value that's available. But I think it would benefit discussion and debate a lot from having some empirical data to drive that decision making. So that's another goal of this program as well. And going into kind of the first iteration here, it's outlined in this slide, but kind of at a high level, what it would look like is it needs to have a funding source, and the current proposal is to ask for a grant from the community node, which has been collecting LPT rewards consistently for these types of community proposals. So have created a grant proposal for that, and the current plan is to structure the program over the course of 3 weeks, where each week is a round, and for each round, there's specific rules around how the rewards that are budgeted for a round would be distributed. So what this would look like at the moment is for the first initial round, we would have a budget of, say, 7,000 LPT. And with that budget, there will be rules for how that gets distributed to the top performers on the leaderboard. And the current initial rules proposed are having a threshold score, where it's indicated here the threshold score is 3 to start off with. And the rationale for that is that a total score of 3 right now roughly corresponds to someone that is able to maintain real-time transcoding, but is also at least able to maintain a 50% success rate. So not ultimately where we want to be, but feels like a reasonable bar to set in order to kind of rally people around to hit that initial minimum requirement. So anyone that meets this threshold would divide up a certain portion of the 7,000 LPT. So it would be, I think, 4,000 LPT that gets split amongst anyone that meets the threshold score. And then there's an additional bonus for regional performance, where in each region that's specified right now, if you are in the top 5 performers and also meet that threshold, then you get an additional 200 LPT. So trying to start out simple here, and there's certainly room for feedback and evolution of these rules. And that's why this is structured as kind of 1 week rounds. So we want to do this first pass iteration of the program, and we want to split into different rounds so that there's an opportunity to, 1, observe the results of past rounds in order to inform distribution rules going forward, and 2, also garner community feedback based on those results in real time as we proceed each of those rounds. There's a link here to the proposal, which I hope is being reviewed right now. But if you want more details around kind of the initial thinking here, definitely worthwhile checking that out. And it's a starting point. So as I mentioned, the goal here is really to kickstart experimentation. So certainly room for feedback and iteration here.
Cool. Yeah, this is my second set of bullet points, which I think Yandin described. But a couple other points. I think we'd love to move quickly on this because it is an experiment. We want to start learning, and we'd love to, see if these incentives validate, if these incentives actually work and are enough to onboard, really useful capacity in regions where it doesn't exist right now. So, if it gets approved, feel free to add comments, discussion. It might get modified before approval, but if it gets approved, we'd love to be able to do the first reward distribution by the 21st, which is a little over a week from now, which would be looking at the 7-day performance from the 14th through the 21st. So, coming up, if people spin up, nodes in Asia that have a score of over 3, there is, tokens set aside to reward the people in the top 5, and anyone who passes a score of 3, starting a little over a week from now. So I think that's exciting. The other thing is, this is just an experiment. It's not a super formal, incentivized network type program that's responsible for the entire distribution of initial token like you see on some networks. This is a grant proposal being run by Yondon. I think it's subject to change based on feedback in between rounds, where the rules may change, the targets may change, based on what we're learning from the community and what it takes to onboard the really helpful type of capacity. So participate with eyes open, knowing that it's flexible and it's just 3 weeks long initially. But the bigger point is, well, let's use this test to think about additional in protocol or out of protocol incentives, and actually move the network towards having the right incentives long term through the governance process. All right, so that's it for the program. Does anyone have any questions or comments? What do people think in terms of just initial reaction of the order of magnitude of these rewards that we're talking about? Imagine if you're a top performing node in 2 of the 3 regions, and you pass that threshold, and that's enough to earn, I'll put the ballpark, 600 LPT over the course of a 7-day period, and again, the next 7-day period that might be available to again. Do you think that's compelling to get someone with a couple GPUs to say, oh yeah, I'll learn to run a Livepeer node because this is there for the taking? Or do you think the order of magnitude of it is not quite high enough to incent that sort of behavior?
I think that this is a nice thing, but I think this is a nice thing that would be better served when the network is sufficiently scaled with larger providers and there's the need and desire to get smaller players into the game. I think for the ambition that Livepeer has around doing this open video infrastructure for the world, you need some really heavy duty GPU providers to be part of that. And I think this will not make any difference in their calculation. My personal perspective is that there should be next to zero focus on really, a lot of the existing node operators are either running a very small number of GPUs or are not planning to run GPUs at all. And there should be all the focus on just the larger, getting larger providers onto the platform, because that's the only thing that's going to move the needle. And then once you get a couple of those on, then you can backfill a lot of the smaller operators, because then there'll be more fees and there'll be more tooling that's created, but everything will be kind of aligned around that. That's my perspective. So I think this is great. I think this is a good thing to do, but I don't think that this is what is what should be taking up time.
Yep, good feedback, Victor. Note that there are tracks of work going on related to onboarding and partnering with larger GPU miner operators, doing things like at Livepeer we'll run the orchestrator and just let them hook their GPUs up to the orchestrator, or essentially subsidizing the rental of GPUs to ensure enough capacity for the Livepeer.com API users in these early days as well. So I think that there is a lot of attention going into the side that you think is important and I think is important, but ultimately I think the public, like Livepeer only works if the public network itself contains the correct incentives to onboard the right type of hardware and infrastructure to the network. And this incentive alone is not nearly enough, but it might be, it might be a starting point. It might be like a bridge for a couple of weeks that we can learn from, that we can try and validate certain assumptions while we collectively look at how we alter the right long-term incentives.
Thanks for the context, Doug.
Hi, Doug. It's Chris.
Hey, Chris.
Hi. Yeah, I think at least from our perspective, it's a good motivator for us to, get our score higher than 0. So I think it's a good bridge, as you just referred to it. I don't know, just speaking openly, I don't know if the incentive there is high enough for us to do this and then keep it running, until there's meaningful traffic on the network. So that's how I'm thinking about it right now. I think we'd like to jump in and try and participate, but we might need more than a few days to get some things in place to do that. But yeah, I think the question there is, is the investment worth it, for this experiment? And then what's the incentive for us to keep that going from, a smaller operator perspective? And then I'd also say that I'd appreciate introductions, and maybe some other smaller operators would too, to some of the GPU providers you've been talking to. Because that could go a long way in, convincing us to keep this infrastructure up and running until we see, a nice bump in traffic.
Yep, there's a few really good points in there. Thanks, Chris. One is, a couple days might be a quick turnaround to get involved. I agree with that. That's why I think, there's a second round that occurs 7 days after the first round, right? And a third round that comes beyond that. So, if you miss the first round, know that there's a couple more. And then as far as like incentive to continue beyond, this 3-round experiment, I think that is exactly where the community should, suggest, oh, this is working great, let's extend it. Or, oh, here's a way we could make this more sustainable, where it's not a grant from the community node. Maybe it's, an LIP that the protocol itself sets aside some of the inflation for this, or and then who governs that becomes a question, right? And so I think that's the sort of work the community can do. And then the last point I thought was really interesting was, you brought up introductions to large-scale GPU operators, and that's connected to the point Victor was making as well, which was like, maybe it's more important to focus on incentives for those folks than it is for, like the existing group of smaller operators. And one thought is a lot of the quote unquote smaller operators that have been on the network, might not be scalable GPU mining operators, but they are very like Livepeer aware. A lot of them are Livepeer stakeholders or incentivized, and they're actually well positioned to form this sort of bridge between, being the orchestrator operator, but going out and recruiting and partnering with or convincing scalable GPU operators to kind of be the backing infrastructure. Because that's like a lot of the work that, we do at the company, except that's still somewhat centralized and not scalable. If other Livepeer stakeholders independently said, oh, I'm going to run a pool where I run the orchestrator, but partner with GPU operators, much like what Nico's done with Livepool, and you get a number of those that look and feel a little different and are in different regions and whatnot, then you actually end up with like a more resilient performant network. So I think the approach of, hey, like we don't own and we're not going to run GPUs, but what we could do is just find someone who does and help set up and run the software and do the revenue split between the tokens and the fees correctly. That would make the network stronger.
Yeah, on that note, yeah, I hear that. It's similar to the problem, I think, of onboarding traffic, where the people I've spoken to so far like the idea, but they're not too interested in putting time and attention into it until they know how much money they're going to make and how fast. So along those lines, as you were talking, something else came to mind. I don't know if you were able to, the team would be able to try and get memorandums of understanding or letters of intent from certain video providers to say, if the network hits these metrics and milestones, we can commit this much traffic to it. But that could be something that would be helpful for all of us to rally around if we knew that there's a definite goal that we could be moving toward and a commitment on the other end of that.
Cool. Yeah, good feedback. I don't think so far, a limiting factor or bottleneck has been pure scale as much as reliability. But yeah, there's definitely something to what you just suggested that I understand. It could make it easier for you to onboard capacity if there was some indication of the fees that were coming down the pipe.
Yeah, and in exchange, we could commit to some level. I mean, collectively, we could commit to some quality of service level as a group.
Right. Cool.
I have a quick follow-on question, and I guess this would probably be directed towards Chris. So you were talking about how in your conversations with people, like they think this is a cool idea, but the thing that's most important for them is understanding like whether it's worth their investment, and in order to do that, they need to have some semblance of an understanding of what the value that they'll be able to earn going forward is. And I think that's an interesting point because that's like a problem with a lot of that's a problem with a lot of crypto networks, right? Where you split up the revenue generation into kind of this speculative reward revenue stream and a less speculative fee stream in certain cases if you have two separate tokens. But with something like Bitcoin or Ethereum in the early days, the speculative revenue stream was what set the expectations for people that were looking to make these investments. And kind of in Livepeer's ecosystem, the speculative revenue stream would be the LPT rewards, either via the current in-protocol mechanism for distributing LPT rewards, or potentially additional LPT reward programs, such as the one that we just discussed. So do you think it's the case that a lot of people are just not, they really want to focus on the non-speculative revenue stream at this point? Like they're not as interested in the value proposition of like an additional speculative asset that they can earn? And do you think that's a problem?
I think, again, in my limited conversations of speaking to a handful of people, most of these people are already earning pretty decent revenue streams. So, getting them to take time and attention away from that to put into something speculative is a bit of a hurdle. I hear your point. It's not as if they just have these systems sitting around and they're doing a lot of experimentation. It's that these systems are running usually and generating some pretty good revenue for them. So, at least the people I'm talking to will say to me, yeah, as soon as you can give me an idea of, approximately, what kind of income we might be talking about and when that's going to start, then, they can try something out. But until then, we're fine running what we're running with and making the money that we're already making. So that's the perspective. Yeah, that's the perspective I'm hearing back.
Prior to the leaderboard, there was no visibility that you could actually, have a higher reward cut but still attract stake because, your performance wasn't really visible. Whereas, I don't know if we're there yet. There might be more work to do, or the community might need to actually alter in protocol incentives in some way. But now it's actually possible to have a high reward cut, perform really well, be shown near the top of the leaderboard, and then we have to figure out how to get the community to move stake towards those nodes that are performing really well. But that higher reward cut could again increase the quote unquote income to the node operator to say split with the GPU operator in some way that makes it more clear what the revenue stream is. This might require some in protocol economic changes. But I think this is like a first step that could move towards a world where it doesn't just have to be all fees for GPU operators.
Yeah, I guess my takeaway and the motivation for my question to Chris was just that it seems like it could be the case for certain types of people that due to the environment that we're in, it's a much different environment than, let's say, 2013 or 2014 in the early days of these types of networks, where kind of most revenue streams that you would have access to were speculative in nature. And I think these days there's even like different classes of participants where like you might have more speculative miner types that's what they do. Like they tap into speculative revenue streams. But perhaps it's the case that certain types of people, it's like when in their calculus for deciding whether to start participating in network, yes, it might be the fact that there's like sustainable speculative revenue streams. But for some people, that might not be as appealing right now, just given the presence of less speculative revenue streams that are available out there. I don't know if this is for sure now, but it sounds like certain people might think that way. And I think that's like an interesting point of information where maybe there should not be an assumption that just because there's a steady speculative revenue stream available denominated in LPT, that necessarily is enticing enough for someone, because they might just say like, I'm tired of earning a speculative asset. I have enough speculative assets that I'm earning, and I really want something that's a little more stable and less volatile. I don't know if that's the case, but kind of Chris's point made me think about that.
Yeah, I'm not an orchestrator or a transcoder, but I totally agree with Yondan's view, because like I've been participating in 2 or 3 other networks, and what I see is that like initially for the first few months or first year, like that speculation, people come in or rally just because of those speculative rewards. But what their idea is basically, when the project gives you gives their focus or a roadmap, saying that like after a couple of years this is what it is, and when they are in the network for those couple of years, and when the things don't turn out as the roadmap puts it out to be, then obviously the interest in that goes down. And people are not really that interested on the speculative side of it rather than the useful side of the network, is what I think. Because I clearly saw when I came into the Livepeer in the initial stages, it was all because of the the speculative side of things, where people were rallying behind Livepeer. I could see much more interest, a lot of people joining into Livepeer network and all. Like there was action going on all the time. But now, like for the past few months, we see less and less action, less and less people joining into the Discord channel or any other things, just because I think, like, this is my personal view, just because what our assumptions were, like, at the end of, like, I joined in 2018, I thought by 2020 we'll have 3 or 4 like big players coming in. And providing, Livepeer might be providing those transcoding services, and it might be earning a good chunk of fees, and that keeps rolling on. But that never happened. Of course, like it's very tough. I totally see it's very tough. It's a chicken and egg problem. But I think mostly if it's the side of the demand side, I think that's more of a problem. Rather than the supply side, because if we, as Chris was saying, if you can keep coming up with some memorandum of understanding or some kind of announcements saying that these are the players that are coming in, just get ready for these things, that might start rolling things up, and that might start even, it's like a good motivating factor for the additional players to come in and the bigger players to come in, and things like that. And even having this performance rewards maybe like baked into the protocol would also be a great incentive, I think, rather than like 1 or 2 weeks. If it is for a temporary period, I think it should be like really big, that it's a great motivating factor for them, for people to come in. Because I see some of the test networks that they do, the incentives are really big, like 3% of the tokens are being rewarded just for like within 2 months, which is like huge, and that is like bringing in thousands of people rallying into the network. That's what I see in some of the test networks that I am participating in.
Great. Thanks for the feedback.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting perspective. So thanks for sharing that.
All right, coming up to the top of the hour here. Anyone else have anything to share or ask? Great. Okay, so we will look for any comments or discussion around the current grant proposal. Again, it's the first pass small experiment, but there can certainly be larger experiments or iterations on it that follow. So please share feedback, stay involved, and we will look to iterate towards the right incentives through the public network and outside of the protocol over the next couple months. So thanks everyone for joining. See you soon.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
Thank you.